Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast, where it's all about turning your job search into a slam dunk. Your host is Angela Copeland.
Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Copeland. Today, I'm at Indeed Interactive in Austin, Texas, and with me, I have Paul Wolfe. Paul is the Senior Vice President of Human Resources at Indeed. He oversees all global human resource functions, including talent acquisition, employee retention, compensation, benefits, and employee development. This is actually Paul's third time on the show. Paul, thank you for joining me again.
I'm always happy to spend some time with you, Angela, and I'm thrilled with the fact that it's my third time on your show.
I know. I don't think anyone else has been on my show three times.
Oh, I appreciate that. I make it next year. We'll make it 4.
Right?
We'll keep going.
Exciting. Well, this has been such an amazing year for job seekers. I mean, I'm so excited to say it is finally a job seekers market. And I'm curious, you look at job seekers and job search from all over the place. From your perspective, what are some things that are changing in 2019 with regards to job seeking?
No, I think it's a great question. I think we've seen a tight labor market, especially in the U.S. for the last few years. So it's definitely a job seekers market, and the power is in their hands. I think from a job seeker's perspective, do research, think about what you want to do, what type of company you want to work for, and there's plenty of opportunity out there to research information about companies and then refine your search. I think on the employer side, what's becoming more and more apparent is really building relationships with candidates and communicating with them often. We hear about this black hole a lot from candidates where they apply for a job and they may get a phone screen and then they hear nothing else from the employer, or they make it to a first round interview and they hear nothing else. And job search for a job seeker is a stressful time. And so, you want to kind of keep up. You don't want to feel like you're following up too often. So I think employers really need to focus on communication with job seekers, where they are in the process, even what the process looks like before it starts, to give them some sense of the scope of what's going to go on. And I think transparency is still a big key to me, both on the job seeker and the employer side. If the employer's decided the job seeker is not right for the role that they have right now, be honest with them. If they were intrigued by the candidate, keep in touch with them and keep that relationship going so that when the right role comes up, or a role they think they'd be better aligned with, reach out to that candidate. And I think on the candidate side, be open, be honest about what you're looking for. I think because it's a tight labor market, it is their opportunity to really ask questions of the company. And I always say the interview process is really a two-way street, and sometimes employers forget that. This is as much as the employer determining if the candidate's right for the role, that it is, than it is for the candidate to really see what this employer is like, and do they want to work there. And I say this a lot, and I mean this in the nicest way, but this is the best behavior you're going to get in this interview process. The candidate's going to portray the things that they want you to understand, that they've been successful at in their career, and not that they're purposely going to behave worse when they become an employee. But and the same goes on the employer. They're putting their best foot forward, and they should be. Here's who we are as a company. This is what our space looks like. The people you're meeting with are prepared and ready to ask you questions. It's kind of like the dating. It's the first date, and then you start to get to know each other a little bit, and you get into your true kind of persona comes out. And so I always say to candidates, if there's a flag in this process this early, don't necessarily drop out or stop, but really start to dig into that and ask questions to make sure that you can either get comfortable that the flag was just an anomaly, it really wasn't an issue, or if it really is and it's not something that resonates with your values, then you can make the decision to opt out of the process.
Mm-hmm. I think you're totally right. When you mention how similar it is to dating, I mean, we don't go on first dates hoping the person might marry us. We go to see if it's a match, if it's a two-way thing. And you mentioned the black hole. I mean, that is the number one thing I hear from job seekers that they hate. And even on transparency, there's so many times where companies end up putting a job on hold, or there's some reason that maybe they didn't even hire anybody, and the job seeker feels totally rejected. But that whole situation is maybe completely avoidable if the company was a little more transparent about what was going on.
I completely agree. It kind of goes back to, I was the head of HR for Match.com, the dating site for 4 years earlier in my career. And I use the analogy a lot. Like, the process of dating and recruiting is very similar. You just want different outcomes at the end of it. And to your point, you don't go on a first date thinking, I'm going to marry this person. You go on this first date to see if there's a connection.
Right.
And is there something here? Are there some similarities? And should we go on a second date and then a third date? And is there a relationship that's born out of this? And I go back to the transparency comment I made. To your example of they put a job on hold and so they didn't hire. Like, just be honest with the candidate and say, look, for whatever reason we put this job on hold right now. I'm going to keep you on my list. I think you'd be great for the company. If something similar comes up, I'll ping you. If the job gets, put back, created open again, I will ping you. And even if it's a year later, like, I think some of the best recruiters are really transparent and they focus on building the relationship for the longer term, not just for the current job at hand, because it may not be a match for that job. But if I met you, I'd be like, oh my God, like, Angela would be amazing, at Indeed for any myriad of roles, and we don't have the right job right now. Like, keeping a relationship going and checking in, and even the candidate checking in with the recruiter every once in a while. And when that job comes up, like, then that candidate's top of mind. And I think the best recruiters really think about this in a long-term game, not just filling a job today.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. I mean, it really gives you a situation where you get the best people and you really have your pick. Well, so speaking of job searching, Indeed recently released some research about the best jobs in the U.S. in 2019. And I'm curious, based on the research that you've seen, what are a few of the sectors that are doing really well this year?
It's interesting. It's our third year doing this study, and the first year was heavily dominated by tech jobs, which is not overly surprising in the grand scheme of things. The second year was heavily dominated by construction jobs, which was at first really interesting, not what you'd expect. But if you think about there's job growth. We're in a good economic situation, so there's job growth. Companies are expanding, the need for more commercial space. People are buying homes. I was listening to a piece on TV about how, I forget what city it was, it's basically outgrown its original footprint, and they're kind of expanding the city to keep the growth within the city, I'm assuming from a tax revenue perspective. But it was interesting to hear we still have this sprawl going on. And so when you think about it in what's going on from that perspective, like construction jobs, albeit you don't think they're going to rise to the top of the list, they were. This year was really interesting because we saw a really diverse mix of industries. We've got construction on there, we've got technology jobs on there, we have some legal jobs on there, graphic design, some more of the creative. So it's a nice mix. I think mechanical engineer and industrial engineer were the two top jobs. So back in kind of that tech-ish space, or less, at least technology tangentially related space. But it's just interesting to see how this study evolves and the results evolve year over year.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I mean, how do these different jobs make it? Like, how do we decide what is a best job?
So it is, we use a minimum salary on there, so they're high-paying jobs. I'm pretty certain it was $75,000 or more in US dollars. And then we look at job seekers' comments on Indeed about the types of jobs that they're looking for. Is how we define best.
Well, I think what's so special is that you do have so much data on the jobs available and the job searches. So it's really great to see this kind of information coming out. It's definitely really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the amount of data we collect, and I think not just collecting it, but how we make use of it for job seekers and for our clients, the employers, is one of the things that really gets me excited about working for a company like Indeed.
Absolutely. Well, so you mentioned salary, which is honestly my most favorite topic this year. So in the past, a lot of companies would ask candidates their current salary or their salary history, and that question is actually becoming illegal in some states and some cities. So you have got to be right in the middle of this. How do you feel like this question is going to continue to evolve?
You're right. I mean, and the topic comes up a lot. I'm based in New York. It's illegal in New York to ask somebody what they're currently making. And if you had asked me this question 10 years ago, so I've been at Indeed 5, so pre-Indeed, I, like a lot of other recruiting leaders and HR leaders, would have said, well, we need to know, so we're putting the best offer in front of the candidate, we know if there's a match from a salary perspective. And I've almost I've swung the complete other way, similar to you. It's a hot button for me right now. I think, in a perfect world, every company and every job had a salary range tied to it that was both visible internally and externally to candidates and employees. We're actually going to do that at Indeed by the end of this quarter. We've committed that to our employees. I think it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And I think there are a couple of reasons why it's right. One, that always becomes an awkward conversation in the recruiting process. Two, if somebody's applying for a job and it has a similar title to a job that they have today or a title that they think is right for them, but their salary, requirements or their current salary is $100,000 more than the range for that job, like it'd be great for them to know that up front. And this kind of gets a little bit at the black hole issue. If somebody were, in today's world probably, if somebody were to apply for a job and they wanted to be at a base of 150, but the job really paid 50, chances are they'd never hear anything from that company or that recruiter. So I think, go back to transparency. The more transparency, the better match that I think we can find between job seekers and clients or employers. I also think that when you talk about a range and you've got either a low end or a minimum, and then you look at the high end or the maximum of a job, I think some of what happens today when we don't talk about this up front is a lot of companies do, like Indeed, do pay equity studies every year to make sure that we're paying equitably across all of our employees, across our entire global population. And in the first year, we saw some inequalities and we made adjustments to make sure that we were paying people equitably. In the second year, we saw some fewer anomalies and we made fewer adjustments. So you want to see that trend going over time because you should work on the systemic and behavioral issues that cause these inequities. I think by starting people, even if it's an entry-level role, and I really believe in this for entry-level roles, this is the minimum that we pay. We don't pay any less than this. And so I think you just start that group of people out that are typically fresh out of school, first job, or they've had a couple internships for their first kind of career job, if you will. You're starting them all out at the same level. Any of the inequity is gone from that. Certainly if somebody makes more than that, you want to understand that and you can get at that through the conversation. You can make adjustments for that. But I think you're at least putting people on an even setting, an even level playing field at the onset of it. There's a lot of research out there that shows that men negotiate more than women and they're more vocal about it. And so I think this starts to level some of that playing field. And that's why I just believe in this transparency across the board, because then I just think you're just kind of smoothing things out for everybody. And then you can, what this transparency really becomes reliant on managers having clear conversations with their employees as they're making pay decisions while they're working at your company. So it takes it from it being an issue or a hot topic or a tough topic in the interview process. And now we just need to make sure our managers are equipped and educated to have meaningful conversations about compensation. And putting the ranges out there, you can talk about this is why you're kind of in the bottom quartile or in the middle of the range or at the high end of the range and what it means. And here's a path for you to move through the range in any given job. So I am on your side now, a huge advocate of full transparency for salary ranges.
Oh, that's so good to hear. I mean, I think it could actually be really motivating. Like when you mention like the sort of path to move up within the company, when you know what it is that you need to do and what will take you there and you know what the range is, like you have something to shoot for. I will say most of the laws I've seen have typically been that you can't ask pay history. My very favorite though is California. I think they came back maybe last year and they said that if the candidate asks in an interview what the pay range is, you are required to disclose it. Now I wish they were just giving it regardless of if you knew the rule and asked. But I really like that idea. Like you said, what Indeed is doing, I like the idea of everyone being on the same page about what the ranges are for the different jobs.
Yeah, I go back to the transparency. It makes all of these conversations much easier. And to your point about progression, like we talk a lot and our employees want to hear a lot about the ability to career progression at Indeed. And so we've done a lot of work around career pathing. To me, this is just related. It's just a different form of progression. It's pay progression. And so I think being really crystal clear about what that looks like and having meaningful conversations is really what I'm driving for at Indeed.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned that this year things really are a two-way street. And I have seen some things that really are interesting to me. I've seen internal recruiters now from other organizations who show up late to interviews. I've seen them show up 30 minutes late, an hour late, sometimes 2 hours late. And as a job seeker, that's really hard, right? Because you can't really speak up about it to sort of anybody if you actually want to get a job. So I'm curious, if you find yourself in a situation that's really uncomfortable as a job seeker, is there any way that we can recover gracefully from this kind of thing?
It's tough. You see this more and more, and you hear about it more and more, which is, to me, as a recruiting professional and an HR professional, sad. I think, my best advice for job seekers is go into the interview prepared. If somebody's late, you're going to kind of have to take it. I think don't let that throw you off your game. I think the other advice I would give them, because it is a tight labor market, the power is in the job seeker's hands. And so, again, I go back to kind of the comment I made earlier. This is the best behavior. And so if this is what you're seeing in the interview process, you may choose to say, you know what, I'm going to opt out of this process because I have these other opportunities, and I know there are other companies that are hiring a job that I'm looking for and I'd be interested in working for. So I think that is, tuck that, don't become cocky about it, but tuck that in the back of your mind, because of the market that we're in. I think the other thing is we at Indeed interview, we're big on candidate experience. We send a candidate experience survey out to every candidate, whether it is we just talked to them for a phone screen or they made it to the final slate and didn't get chosen for the job. And even the person that got chosen for the job at any part along the funnel, we send them a survey. We've got about a 6% response rate, which is good. I'd love it to be more, but we see it increase little by little over time, which is good. And we want the feedback. And then we know the recruiters that, we get the feedback from the candidates, and we know what recruiter that candidate interacted with. And so we really give a lot of feedback to our recruiters. And so if I were seeing this from one of the Indeed recruiters, and I saw that they were, late and not prepared, and kind of the candidate experience wasn't great, and you see a pattern of that, then that's a conversation with that recruiter about performance, and really they're representing the company. And I'm concerned about the Indeed employer brand all the time, because that's how we really engage candidates to think about working for us. And so I think, for the job seekers, it's try not to let it throw you off your game. Kind of go through it, be prepared, your stuff, sell yourself. In the back of your mind, remember that it's kind of the power's in your hands in the type of market that we're in. And then if you get a candidate experience survey, be honest and transparent about it. And then certainly you can always go on, Indeed company reviews or Glassdoor company reviews and talk about your interview experience with that company. I think all companies today are looking at all these channels to get all this crowdsourced information about what people think about them, whether they be a current employee, a former employer, or just somebody who's interviewed with them. And I think, it can be meaningful to provide feedback where they may not have gotten that feedback before. And so I think those are the things that I would just leave with job seekers to think about if they experience something like this.
That is a really good idea. I mean, I haven't seen a ton of companies doing the surveys. I wish everyone was doing it because I really think it would improve candidate experience across the board. But you're right, leaving reviews on other sites, they really do pay attention to those reviews. I mean, I know they get very focused on making sure they're good. So
absolutely. I mean, our employer brand team monitors all those channels for us, and we're diligent about, we're happy to take the good and the constructive feedback. And if it's constructive, we typically will post a reply and ask them to reach out so we can get some more detail. I mean, that's as an HR leader, that's one of my challenges with the anonymity of the reviews. Is I typically want to know some more detail. It's not that you said something constructive about us. I want us to get better all the time, but I just want to know who said that so I can go say hey, I saw your review. I've got a couple follow-up questions to better understand kind of what didn't go well, or I find sometimes employees will use the word benefits very broadly in our engagement survey, and I always want to know what didn't you like about our benefits? And sometimes it's medical or dental, sometimes it's the food that we serve our employees, sometimes it's our open PTO program or something like that. And so the anonymity is challenging to me sometimes, but you can certainly look for patterns and themes, and we're really diligent about managing our employer brand online.
Yeah, it's a good point. Well, so another topic that's really been coming up lately a lot is neurodiversity. And I've had a number of guests on my show come on and talk about neurodiversity in the workforce. And I'm curious, what is Indeed doing in this area to make sure, Indeed is a great place to work for everyone?
No, it's a great question. And I think it just, what we're doing is broadening the conversation about inclusion and pivoting from just this gender and race or ethnicity based focus that we can see. And I think this is part of the challenge with inclusion is neurodiversity, sexual orientation, religion, socioeconomic background that you grew up in is not something I can tell by looking at you by any stretch of the imagination. And if I do try and make an assumption, it probably isn't like we shouldn't make assumptions, we should be transparent about it. Mm-hmm. And I think at Indeed, from an employee perspective, we want all of our employees to be their true authentic selves at work. If you think about it, and that's why we focus on inclusion, and diversity is kind of a subset of inclusion. But if you think about it, other than sleeping, this is where I spend most of my time. And I don't want to be an imposter. There's this concept called the imposter syndrome where, if you are gay, but you don't tell your coworkers about it, and you don't show their true authentic self, you expend so much energy being an imposter. Not an imposter in a bad way that you're lying. You technically are lying to people, but not in a malicious way. You're doing it because you're not sure how people are going to react. And I think the same goes with neurodiversity and kind of all forms of that. One of the things we did last year, we found a great partner in Dublin City University in Dublin, Ireland. They have got a woman named Sandra Healy who runs their diversity and inclusion practice as an educator, but has a really good business mind, and so is able to kind of look at it from an educational perspective and then help businesses think more about it. She and I happened to be speaking at a conference together, and we started chatting, and then she floated this idea. They're doing some research in neurodiversity as it relates to autism, and how people with autism, kind of any place on that spectrum, can be more transparent about it, and then how employers can help, whether it be in the interview process, which I think is amazing, but even more importantly to me as an employee. And so we are sponsoring some research that they're doing that should be launched in the next couple months. And specifically, the first set of research they're doing is around autism and how managers can help folks on their teams that are autistic, and how to ask questions in the right way, how to help accommodate them in the workplace so they can be their true authentic self and do their best work. So I'm really, really excited for this. I don't know of any other company like Indeed that's done anything like this. And to me, this is, Sandra and her team are doing kind of the educational research and putting it into, a form for us to then, and as a company, put it into practice and then to feed back to them what works and what doesn't work, and we iterate on it. And I'm really excited that hopefully this is the first step of many types of projects like this that we can partner with them on to kind of get at this broader conversation about inclusion and how to make sure that everybody, no matter what their background, I always say everybody has a story, and there are all these chapters. So all those chapters, anybody can come to Indeed and be their true authentic self while they're working for Indeed is my ultimate goal.
Oh, that makes me so happy. I think it really sets a good example for other companies to think about. As I've interviewed folks for my show about neurodiversity, they've often talked about underemployment, and that people who are neurodiverse have a harder time, getting full employment, and there are people who really could go out there and work and contribute if they could have some kind of accommodation, or if they were in a business that was a little more accepting. So that's so exciting to hear about. I know, working with job seekers, I do work with folks who are neurodiverse, and when they come to me, they are very often struggling at work, and it's more often than not because they haven't disclosed and they haven't asked for help because they're afraid of what might happen. And so it makes me really excited to hear the work that you're doing in this area.
And I think those are the absolute reasons. I think sadly there's a stigma attached to a lot of inclusion aspects, and neurodiversity and autism being one of them. And we've got to create a place where it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to say, I may need this information in a different way, or I need to attend a meeting in a different way, whatever the case may be. And the majority of these accommodations are pretty simple from an employer perspective. We had similarly related, we had a deaf engineer apply for a role with us in San Francisco, and he was very transparent about it from the get-go, and it made it much easier from our perspective to make sure we were accommodating him in the right way through every step of the process. But that's because there was transparency on both sides early on, and he felt comfortable with that. And I think it goes back to people not feeling comfortable, not sure if I say this, what's going to happen to me or how people are going to treat me. At the end of the day, everybody's a human being. We should just treat everybody with respect and dignity as a human being, and understand that people are different. And I honestly think that's the beauty of the world. And so we should, in a utopian world, we all just work together to make each other feel good. But we don't live in a utopian world. So, but, from my perspective, like everything we can do at Indeed to kind of get at things like this are really important to me and my team.
Absolutely. That's excellent. Well, so this time last year, we were talking about ghosting from employers and how to take it less personally. This year, the big topic that's all over the news is actually candidates ghosting employers, like whether they don't show up for interviews, they don't show up for their first day, they quit with no notice. I've just seen a ton of this in the news, and I've seen it happening in real life. From your perspective, how did we get here? Like, what happened?
It's interesting because we were talking about it on the other side, and I literally got an email this morning before our first session where we had an HR business partner, I won't name the office, that was set to start yesterday who just didn't show up.
Oh, no.
So it's not, HR is susceptible to the same thing that everything else is. I honestly think some of it is, and this isn't a dig on technology, but a lot of it is technology and how, social media, I think this all started in social media and people ghosting each other, whether it be friends ghosting each other or something happened and they don't want to be honest with each other. And so I think technology has driven this, which is unfortunate because I think technology has done a bunch of amazing things for the world and human beings over the course of the last 15 or 20 years. It's certainly made my life easier. Mm-hmm. Comes with some drawbacks. This is one of them. And we do see it from candidates more and more. And I think part of it is, maybe it's more societally acceptable because of technology. Mm-hmm. I think the other thing is again, it goes back to it's a candidates market right now. And my guess for some of them may be, I've got 4 or 5 opportunities. If I stack rank them, you are number 5 on my list. So I'm just going to not tell you, but just not like I'm going to opt out. I'm just not going to tell you I'm going to opt out, which is challenging because you've got recruiters kind of spending their time following up where it goes back to the kind of that black hole. They're spending their time trying to follow up with this candidate that's ghosting, where they could be spending time with a candidate who's engaged and coming in for the interview and really clearing up the black hole and getting them prepped for their round of interviews that may be happening in a couple of days. Mm-hmm. So it is a challenge. It continues to be a challenge. And like I said, like HR folks are not are susceptible to the same types of things.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Well, so in terms of sort of the candidate experience, I also keep hearing that it's taking companies actually longer to hire. I think the number I saw somewhere was 82% longer than maybe 10 years ago. What's causing it to be so much slower than usual right now?
I think we've had this economic growth and companies are hiring, which is a good thing, but we also have kind of more candidates out there than jobs. And so I think companies are being really mindful about who they hire. And kind of going through the process, and because they have more candidates, the process may ultimately be taking longer because you're getting more folks through the funnel, which is not a terrible thing. I think for me, I try and be really mindful of everybody at every level that I interview and that I hire. I just recently hired a VP of Inclusion and a VP of Global HR who'll start later in June. And I know that the VP of Inclusion role took longer than I expected it to because I wanted those candidates to meet with people at different levels in the organization. Because I do value the feedback that we get in our debriefs. Ultimately, I'm the hiring manager and I've got to make a decision. But the VP of Inclusion, I had them meet with a subset of the inclusion team here at Indeed. I had them meet with some of our IRG Inclusion Resource Group leaders across the globe at Indeed. Some of our senior leaders, some of my peers, some of the HR leadership team, just to get a good kind of 360 view on each of the candidates, because it's such an important role. Whether it's a VP of HR or a VP of Inclusion, they're both very important roles, and I think every role is important. It doesn't make a difference if they're VPs or what level they are. And so I think from my perspective, the process took longer than I expected, but I was really diligent about pinging the candidates along the way, saying, hey, here's what's coming next. Here's why I want this perspective. I spent a lot of time with them, and so I don't think it's a bad thing. And I think candidates, I think it's fine for a candidate or a job seeker to ask up front, how long do you envision this process taking? How many rounds of interviews? And I think it's, I think employers should be honest about that. Like, I'm really diligent about, spending time with the candidates. I went so far with the VP of Inclusion and the VP of HR candidates. I would map out who they were meeting with, what titles those people had at Indeed, how long they've been in Indeed, and to some extent, some of the categories of questions some of the people might dig into based on what I know. Like our Chief Operating Officer, Dave O'Neill, I told the candidates, I said, he is going to want to know ROI and metrics you use to measure the impact of diversity and inclusion programs at your current company or previous places, or how you think about that. A completely fair question for a chief operating officer. But I wanted them to go into it. I didn't give anything away by giving them that information. But again, the job search is stressful. The interview process is stressful. We've all been on both sides of this equation. And I wanted to arm them with the most information possible to take the stress away a little bit, and they can really just focus on their answer to the questions and not having to do all this research. It was easy for me to pull a bunch of information from Workday, put it in a matrix, and send it over. Like, here's who these people are. And so I think, more and more recruiters should think about, and that goes back to relationship building with candidates and really setting them up for success at the end of the day.
I like that, and it sort of says this is not a test. Like, this is really truly to see if you're a good fit for our company, rather than how good are you at memorization or some other useless, thing.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Like, in high school and college, I would memorize stuff. I was gonna say crap. So I get through a test. I'm not a great test taker, so I could get through the test the next day, and then honestly, I probably remember 10% of that today. And do I really make use of any of it? No. It's like clogging up brain space that I could use for other things. And so this isn't a test. I love that kind of analogy. I may steal that from you. This isn't a test. This is this the best fit and the best addition for you and for the company? This is definitely a two-way street. And so I think that the more we can do to help and prepare candidates and job seekers who are coming in for interviews, so they can, again, we take some of the stress away and they can really focus on the process at hand. Is, do I really want this job? Are these people I want to work with, and how can I portray myself in the best light? I think that's really, it's meaningful to candidates. It certainly was to the VP of Inclusion candidates. They were very appreciative of getting all that detail. And I think it just helps them put their best foot forward.
Absolutely. Well, so I know that you are rolling out a really exciting partnership this year at Indeed Interactive. I wanted to be sure to ask you about this today while we spend a little time together. Can you share with us a little bit about this partnership that you're rolling out?
Yeah, I am wonderfully excited about this. So we've decided to partner with Goodwill to really help more people get jobs. And I think we've committed to helping 1 million people get jobs. And it kind of goes back to our conversation earlier about neurodiversity and underemployment. I don't think that the opportunity for employment is evenly spread across everybody. And so there are some folks that need more of a support system to help find a job. Somebody who may not have been on the job market for a while, or may have been home for a long time, taking care of raising children, taking care of older family members, which is becoming more of the norm, taking care of your parents, and really helping them think about what their resume should look like, and again, putting their best foot forward there. Practice interviews and mock interviews. We've got some great programs for recruiters to think about how to engage job seekers. And so we're really excited about the partnership with Steve Preston, who's the CEO of Goodwill, and we're actually announcing it on the main stage later today. So your listeners getting a little bit of a preview, and our Leadership Forum attendees will get a little bit of a preview, because I've got the pleasure of doing a fireside chat with Steve Preston, their CEO, in a little while in front of our Leadership Forum attendees. So we're very excited about this partnership.
That's excellent.
And if you think about it, I think we all know Goodwill, or we all think about Goodwill for their stores. But there's a huge part of their business that really is helping people get back on their feet. And part of that is finding jobs and connecting employers with job seekers. And what better organization for a company like Indeed to partner with? When it was founded 15 years ago, was about getting all jobs online and kind of making that process easier for job seekers. Kind of our original tagline was one search, all jobs. So that was the concept that Ronnie and Paul, our founders, started with. And so I think this is just kind of a natural progression for us for our mission of helping people get jobs.
Oh, that's incredible. I think many people often find themselves in a difficult situation at some point in their lives, and this kind of help is just incredible, because like you said, not everyone has the same support system. Well, Paul, this has been excellent. I really appreciate you taking the time away from the conference today to talk with me.
I'm always happy to chat with you, Angela, and hopefully your listeners get a little tidbit out of our conversation today.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed the episode today, please don't forget to help me out. Go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe to the show. The more subscribers we have, the easier it is for other people to find the show.
Thank you for listening to the Copeland Coaching Podcast today with your host, Angela Copeland. Tune in next time to get more great tips on turning your job search into a slam dunk.